Great, thank you very much for the introduction, Jan, and thank you to everyone for the opportunity to be here today. It's a real pleasure to have the chance to address the full breadth of the value chain, as we've already touched. I think that's so important. Hopefully I'm going to sort of act as a bit of a scene setter for the day, and then we'll get lots of really interesting discussions as we go through the day. So, as I say here, plastic really is the wonder material of the last 70 years. I mean, it's got a longer history than that, but if we look sort of from around 1950, when the industry really started to scale, global production's gone from around about nothing to something in the region of 350 to 400 million tons a year in 2019. The tree map that we're looking at sort of shows the breakdown of how we see that production occurring across applications and polymer types. The success of plastic isn't just sort of in absolute terms, it's also seen exceptional growth in comparison to other materials. You know, over the sort of 1970 to 2019 period, biomass or fossil fuels grew by about 150%. Metals production grew by about 250%. Non-metallic metals, so things like sand, grew by about 400%. Plastic grew by over 1,000%. And that reflects the amazing properties that plastic can bring. It's versatile, it's scalable, and it's a very cost-effective material. But of course, the reason we're all here today, the reason this is a subject of conversation, is the fact that as we were all concentrating on producing this wonder material, we weren't keeping an eye on what was happening to the product once it reached the end of its life. And as a result of that, a very famous recent study found that we've probably got something in the region of 7,000 million tons of plastic in landfill or in the wider natural environment at the moment. That problem is only going to keep growing. If we look at this, the chart that we've got in front of us, the boxes with the little red lines around them represent what I would call sort of fast-moving plastics or single-use plastics. It doesn't map perfectly one-to-one, but those represent about 65% of the plastic produced in 2019. So these plastics which we take and dispose and add to that waste problem are a hugely predominant share of the total plastic produced. So wonder material, real challenge managing that stream. Are we going to do it? Well, the good news is that there's clearly a lot of momentum behind the drive to circularity. It's really at the front of people's mind, and there's sort of energy and investment from people across the value chain. We see that action from governments in the form of legislation, and then from petrochemical companies all the way down to consumers in the waste management sector. But is it going to be enough? This slide sets out sort of a scenario that we've run recently. It's not a forecast. I said it's a scenario, so it needs to be taken as such. What does it show us? Well, the columns are showing us the growth of what we see as PET, PT, and polyolefins, so polyethylene and polypropylene going into the packaging sector. They account for about 80% of packaging polymers by our reckoning, and that segment, so packaging polymers, is about a third plastic produced. So if we can fix the issue of waste coming out of the packaging polymer sector, and particularly on those couple of families of polymers, we're really making a lot of progress. So the columns show our view of demand for virgin polymer growing over the next 20 years, and that shows pretty strong growth. And the green line is showing our base case, so this kind of is our forecast for the growth in recyclate in that period. It's combining across PE, PP, and PET. We forecast growth, roughly speaking, doubling over that period, much higher rates in rPET than we see for RPP and RPE. But in combination, as I said, you get to approaching 40% recycling rates by 2040 if we continue along our base path. The yellow line is where it gets a bit more interesting. So I said this is a scenario, it's not a forecast. We ran a scenario for what we call the sustainable future. The assumptions that go behind this were effectively the adoption of single-use plastic legislation, single-use plastic directive style legislation globally, and then pushing that through into the demand side. That pushes through investment in chemical recycling, which really lets us pick up the harder to recycle elements in the plastics value chain. That leads us to seeing rPET touching 90% recycling around the world, and polyethylene, polypropylene touching sort of the 50 to 60% region. What does that mean in totality? Well, overall, we see the recycling rate growing to about 70% over that time period, just under that. That's an extra 50 million tons of polymers recycled in the year 2040. And over the 2020 to 2040 forecast period, that would be a 400 million ton saving of plastic that's going through recycling rather than through other waste disposal methods. That's obviously got a huge impact on the value chain. That would take about 1 million barrels of oil off oil demand off the 2040 outlook. And that would save about still seeing about 60 million tons, or still see about 1 million tons of polyethylene, polypropylene, and PET packaging that is disposed of in a non-recycling method. So this is a very ambitious scenario, but it still tells us that there's going to be a lot of waste potentially that needs to be processed or addressed in other sustainable methods, perhaps. So one of the key challenges that we face this year, obviously, when looking at this, is the huge global pandemic and economic crisis that's enveloped every sector across the world. And there was a lot of trepidation that amongst the casualties or challenges that arise from this would be that people would be thrown off circularity and the importance we place on that because of the challenging economic environment. And certainly we've seen in the past that in a low oil price environment, recycled plastic faces a much more challenging environment as people go for the price advantaged virgin polymer. What we see on this side, actually, I think is a really positive news for showing how we've embedded the circularity agenda. So on the left-hand side, we're looking at prices for rPET pellet in the US, which is the dark blue line, and in Europe, which is the light blue line. This is showing the ratio of price between rPET pellet, so that's food grade, the stuff that goes back into plastic bottles, versus virgin polyester. And what we can see is that we moved to a premium for these products in 2019, driven by regulation, driven by the corporate commitments, and that instead of seeing people diverting immediately into virgin polyester, as we've seen in the past, into virgin PET, consumer brands have stuck to their guns. They've continued to invest and buy the recycled material. And I think if their commitments can stick in this environment, in these challenging conditions, when revenue lines are under such challenge, then that's really positive for where we can go when hopefully the economy returns to something like normal over the course of 2021 and onwards. And on the right-hand side, this is a forecast the bottle demand going out in the US. And the change, the light blue, is what we saw in Q1. So this was sort of a forecast made just as the lockdown was being implemented in Europe. And the dark blue line shows what we're seeing at the middle of this year. And what you can see is there are some differences, particularly in 2021 and 2022, but they're very marginal, and they catch up again very quickly. And we get back to parity very quickly. So, as I said, the industry seems to have stuck to its guns, and we believe there will be a quick return from any deviation that we have seen across the course of this year. So hopefully, across those few slides, I've done a couple of things. If I've done my job properly, hopefully I've reaffirmed for everyone that plastic is a critical material for modern life. It's not something we can just walk away from. I hope that you'll agree that the sustainability challenges it creates are real, and that there's real energy for addressing these across the value chain, even in the face of that biggest economic contraction of modern times. On this slide, what I've done to showcase sort of, I guess, the challenge here that we can't address this one by one. This has to be a systemic, value chain-wide approach. Is I've borrowed some data from the recent report by Semic and Pew from their Breaking the Plastic Wave. Excellent report for anyone who hasn't had a chance to digest it yet. And really, this just shows for me the extent to which everyone needs to play their part. We can see here that packaging companies are going to be required to look at how they design packaging. We're going to have to see petrochemical companies, waste management companies collaborating to improve recycling and processing. It's really going to be an effort across the board to achieve the goals we need to get to. So hopefully that sets the scene. I'm certain that today's conference will showcase that energy and enthusiasm I've touched on in all the sessions as we come across, and I look forward to hearing colleagues in presentations and in the side sessions talking about the role that they're going to play in achieving the systemic change. Thank you very much.
Guy, thank you very much for a very insightful presentation. As we're getting ready for Gut's presentation, just to let you know on the results of the first poll that was conducted. Interesting enough, when we're asked, are you currently engaged in the circular incentives. There is a zero reply on not at all. So everybody at least is working towards something, which I think in itself is an achievement. We would have asked that 10 years ago, that would be different. 47% is saying that they're exploring. We're seeing 26%, and for both are intensively scaling up or are increasingly early adapters. So I think so a 50-50 group of people are fully focused and working or scaling up on it. So quite interesting that everybody's focused on creating this circularity at least. Guts, the word is to you.